Have you ever canceled plans you were actually looking forward to, got home, sat alone, and felt completely fine about it? Better than fine, actually. Relieved. Like something tight in your chest finally loosened the moment the door closed behind you. And then 2 days later, you were scrolling through your phone wishing you had someone to call. Not someone to go out with, just someone who gets it. Someone who knows you well enough that you do not have to explain yourself from scratch every single time. If that is you, you are not broken. But there is something specific going on inside you that is worth understanding. You want connection. Real, deep, genuine connection. You think about it more than most people would guess. You notice when a friendship feels shallow and it bothers you in a way you cannot always put into words. You want people who know the real version of you, who you can be completely honest with, who you do not have to perform for. And at the same time, the idea of actually maintaining that kind of closeness, of being consistently available, of showing up for someone regularly, makes something in you quietly pull back. Both of those things are true for you at the same time, and that tension never fully goes away. Most people would call this introversion. And while introversion is part of it, it does not explain the whole thing. Introverts recharge alone. That is real, and that is valid. But what you are dealing with is more complicated than just needing quiet time after being around people. It is the specific experience of genuinely wanting closeness and also genuinely struggling with what closeness actually requires. The availability, the consistency, the vulnerability of letting someone see you in more than just the good moments. That is not introversion. That is something that was shaped by experience. Psychologist Carl Rogers, one of the most important figures in humanistic psychology, believed that every person carries two needs that run alongside each other at all times: the need for positive regard, to be accepted and valued by others, and the need for self-actualization, to grow into who you actually are, on your own terms. You are caught directly between those two needs. They are both real, and they pull in opposite directions, and neither one is wrong. But when they have never been integrated, they create a life that feels perpetually slightly off. Like you are always almost getting what you need, but never quite landing in it. People who genuinely enjoy solitude but also crave deep connection almost always grew up in an environment where connection came with a cost. Not necessarily a dramatic cost, not necessarily anything obvious, just a consistent pattern where being close to people required something from you that felt like too much. Maybe closeness meant managing someone else's emotions. Maybe it meant losing yourself in what someone else needed. Maybe it meant being visible in ways that felt unsafe. And so, without ever making a conscious decision about it, your mind landed on a simple conclusion. Alone is easier. Alone is safer. Alone is where you can actually breathe. That conclusion was probably right at the time. The environment you were in probably did make closeness complicated. The people around you probably did require things from you that were too heavy for where you were in life. And solitude genuinely was the place where you could think your own thoughts, feel your own feelings, exist without it affecting anyone or requiring anything in return. Solitude became your baseline, your reset, the place that felt most like you. And you carried that all the way into adulthood without ever stopping to ask whether it still needed to be the default. So now you live with this split. The adult version of you knows that isolation has a cost. You have felt it, the loneliness that arrives on a Sunday afternoon when you have been alone all weekend, and suddenly the quiet feels less like peace and more like absence. The sting of watching other people have the kind of easy, comfortable closeness that you cannot quite seem to build for yourself. The way a genuinely good day feels slightly incomplete because there is nobody to share it with who actually knows you well enough for it to mean something. You feel all of that, and then you cancel the plans anyway. Because closeness is not just warmth and connection and being known. It is also obligation. It is also the weight of someone else's bad days arriving in your space uninvited. It is also the loss of control over your own time and energy. It is also the risk of being seen in a moment where you are not okay and not having the option to manage how that lands. Closeness asks things of you that solitude never does. And the part of you that learned to treat aloneness as safety is very aware of that. It has always been very aware of that. So you do something that feels like a compromise, but is actually a way of avoiding the whole problem. You keep people at a certain distance. Not so far that it feels like loneliness. Not so close that it feels like losing yourself. You maintain friendships that are warm, but not deep. You show up when it is easy and go quiet when it requires more. You are the person who everyone likes and nobody fully knows. And from the outside, it looks like a full social life. From the inside, it feels like standing at the edge of something you want, but cannot make yourself step into. That edge has a name in psychology. Researchers call it the approach avoidance conflict. You are simultaneously drawn towards something and repelled by it. The closer you get to real intimacy, the stronger both pulls become. The wanting gets louder, and the fear gets louder too, so you stay at the edge. You get close enough to feel the warmth without fully stepping in, and you tell yourself that this is just how you are, that you are someone who values independence, that you do not need a lot of close relationships, that you are fine. But fine and good are not the same thing. You know the difference between the two, even if you do not always say it. Fine is what you call it when you have accepted something you never actually chose. Fine is the word you use when the real answer would take too long to explain, and you are not sure the other person would understand it anyway. You have been fine for a long time, and the version of you that wanted more than fine has been getting quieter, slowly. The longer fine has been the answer. Rogers also wrote about something he called the conditional self. The version of a person that forms in response to what their environment rewarded and punished. When a child learns that certain parts of them are welcomed and other parts create problems, they start building a self around what works. They fold the unwelcome parts away. Over time, that conditional self starts to feel like the real self. It starts to feel like just who they are. But it is not who they are. It is who they learn to be in order to stay safe and loved in a specific environment that no longer exists. For you, the part that got folded away was probably the part that needed people. The part that wanted to lean on someone. The part that wanted to be fully known and fully held by another person without having to manage the cost of that. That part got treated as too much, or too needy, or too inconvenient. Somewhere along the way. So you folded it. And you replaced it with self-sufficiency that looked like strength but was actually just a very well-maintained wall with good lighting. That is the honest thing about it. It keeps you from getting hurt in the specific ways you got hurt before. It keeps your space clean and your energy intact and your schedule yours. It means nobody ever sees you struggling unless you decide they can. It means you are never dependent on anyone in a way that could be taken advantage of. The wall is genuinely functional. The only thing it cannot do is let anyone in. And that one limitation has a way of showing up at 3 a.m. when everything is quiet, and the aloneness stops feeling chosen. Because there is a difference between chosen solitude and default isolation, and you can feel it even when you cannot name it. Chosen solitude is when you are full from connection, and you want to be alone to process and rest and come back to yourself. Default isolation is when you are alone, because being close to people feels like too much work and too much risk, and you have not figured out how to want both things at once without the wanting itself feeling exhausting. One of those feels like freedom, the other feels like a very comfortable cage, and the cage is comfortable enough that most people in it do not call it a cage. They call it their personality. They say they are just someone who needs a lot of alone time. They say they are picky about who they let in. They say they outgrew the need for a big social circle. All of those things can be true and also be ways of not looking directly at the part that is afraid. Both things can exist at the same time, genuine preference and genuine fear wearing the same clothes. The fear underneath this is usually not the fear of people in general. It is more specific than that. It is the fear of what happens when someone gets close enough to see the parts you manage very carefully in every other context. The parts that are uncertain. The parts that are needy in ways you find embarrassing. The parts that have been hurt before and did not recover as cleanly as you told everyone they did. Getting close means those parts become visible. And visible means vulnerable. And vulnerable means someone else has access to something that can hurt you. So you stay close enough to feel connected and far enough to stay safe. You invest just enough in friendships to not feel completely alone, but not so much that losing them would devastate you. You keep backup distance in every relationship without telling anyone that is what you are doing. And then you wonder why nothing ever feels quite as deep as you want it to. The depth you are looking for requires the exact investment you keep holding back. You cannot get what you will not risk. That is not a moral statement. That is just how this works. There is also something specific that happens with the people who try to get close to you. They feel it. Not always consciously, but they feel the wall. They reach, and you receive it warmly, but do not fully reach back. They share something personal, and you respond well, but do not match it with something equally real from your side. They try to make plans, and you follow through sometimes, and quietly disappear other times, without a clear explanation. Over time, they start to pull back too. Not because they stopped caring, but because consistently reaching for someone who keeps a measured distance eventually stops feeling worth the effort. And then you interpret their pulling back as proof that people always leave, that connection never lasts, that you were right to not invest too heavily. You do not always see the part you played in creating that distance. Not because you are dishonest, but because the distance feels so natural to you, so much like just the way you are, that it does not register as something you are doing. It registers as something that is just happening around you. That is the part worth sitting with. The distance is not just happening. You are maintaining it, carefully, consistently, for reasons that made complete sense once and have not been examined since. The loneliness that comes from this is a specific kind that is hard to explain to people who have not felt it. It is not the loneliness of having nobody. You probably have people. It is the loneliness of having people and still feeling fundamentally unreachable. Of being in a conversation and feeling the version of you in it is slightly less than the full version. Of laughing genuinely at something and still feeling like the laugh came from just close enough to the surface that the real you underneath it was never quite touched. That kind of loneliness is quieter than ordinary loneliness. It is also harder to get rid of, because ordinary loneliness can be solved by being around people. This kind cannot. This kind follows you into the room. It is present in the group chat and at the dinner table, and in the middle of a genuinely good time with people you actually like. It is the gap between the life that looks connected from the outside and the experience of that life from the inside. Closing that gap requires something that cannot be done from a distance. It requires actually letting people in further than feels comfortable. Not all people, not all the way, but further than you currently allow. That is the part that does not have a clean solution. Because letting people in further means accepting that sometimes it will cost you something. Sometimes they will need things from you when you do not have much to give. Sometimes they will see you in a moment that is not managed or polished or okay. Sometimes the closeness will feel like too much, and you will want to retreat, and the retreating will create friction, and the friction will require repair, and all of that is uncomfortable in exactly the ways that made you build the wall in the first place. But the discomfort of real closeness and the discomfort of managed distance are not the same kind of discomfort. One of them occasionally costs you energy and comfort, and the controlled feeling of being completely self-contained. The other one costs you the experience of being fully known by another person, of having someone who can see the not okay version of you and stay, of the specific relief that comes from not having to hold everything alone. Those are not equal costs. They just feel equal when you have been managing distance for long enough that it stopped feeling like a choice. The shift does not start with forcing yourself into more closeness than you can handle. That almost never works and usually makes the wall thicker. It starts with something smaller. It starts with noticing the exact moment you pull back, not judging it, not trying to stop it right away, just noticing it. Catching the moment you match someone's vulnerability with something safe and measured instead of something real. Catching the moment you cancel plans that would have brought you closer to someone. Catching the moment you choose the comfortable distance over the uncomfortable but necessary step forward. Noticing it is the whole first move, because you cannot change a pattern you cannot see. And this pattern has been running so long and so quietly that most of the time it does not look like a pattern at all. It looks like preference. It looks like personality. It looks like just the kind of person you are. Seeing it clearly, without the story wrapped around it, is the thing that creates the first real space between you and it. Not a big space, just enough to ask whether you are choosing it, or whether it is choosing for you. From there, the next move is small on purpose, not a dramatic opening up, not telling someone everything all at once, just letting one real thing through where you would normally keep it back. One genuine reaction instead of a managed one. One moment of saying, actually, this has been hard, instead of fine. One time of staying in the conversation past the point where you would normally wrap it up and go home to the quiet. One small step closer than where you normally stop. That is it. That is the whole next move. Because the goal is not to become someone who never needs solitude. Solitude is not the problem. The time alone is real and it matters, and it is genuinely part of who you are. The goal is to stop using solitude as a way of avoiding the thing you also need. To let it be what it actually is: rest, recovery, coming back to yourself, without letting it become a permanent substitute for the connection that rest is supposed to make you available for. Solitude that leads back to people is healthy. Solitude that replaces them entirely is just loneliness with better branding. The people worth letting in are not going to require you to be available all the time. They are not going to drain you in the ways the people in your past did. Not every person who wants to be close to you is making the same demands that taught you closeness was costly. Some of them just want to know you, actually know you. The version you keep at home when the plans get cancelled and the door closes and you finally stop performing. That version is not too much. It never was. It just never got the chance to find out. You want friends and you love being alone, and both of those things are completely true, and neither one cancels the other out. The wanting is not a weakness, and the solitude is not a flaw. But somewhere between the two of them is a wall that you built for reasons that made complete sense once and has been running your social life ever since without you fully realizing it was there. You can see it now. That is not nothing. That is actually the only place any of this can start from.